Hello from Philadelphia. Giants get a 10-4 win on the first night of the series. They're down 3-0 in the first inning, all of a sudden score 6 runs. It was one of those games where you could really probably write about three or four different guys. I ended up writing about Tyler Fitzgerald. You can find that on NBCSportsBayArea.com. I thought, obviously his best game of the year, and also just he's really interesting to me just because he's kind of one of the few guys on this team, I think, who you look at especially in the starting lineup, like his spot is not set in stone. You look around him and they're set at shortstop, set at third base. They have their two guys at first base, at least for the time being, until Bryce Eldridge, we'll see later this year or next year, whenever he's ready. They have Bailey, Jung Hoo Lee, Elliot Ramos. I'll get to Yaz in a second, but he's going to play a lot. Tyler Fitzgerald, I think, probably looking over his shoulder a little bit. They have two other right-handed hitting middle infielders in Casey Schmidt and Christian Koss, and he admitted last night, he said, if I had this kind of start, it's been a rough start for him. And this kind of spring, he struck out a ton in the spring. Said, if I did this last year, I think I probably would think maybe I'd be back in the minors right now, which is possibly not untrue. I mean, we saw all the roster moves the last 2 years. The leash was pretty short. And I think it's just really interesting what they've done with him because Buster Posey really likes him. He thinks he has a chance to really be a good everyday player for him. And they've been very patient. And you saw it last night, and he breaks out. He's a single shy of the cycle. Huge 3-run homer early on that kind of flips the game in the second inning. And just someone who all of a sudden his numbers are in line with where they were at the end of last year, which was pretty good. And it just looks like Tyler Fitzgerald again. So the patience they've shown with him, I think, is was a key storyline last night. That's what I wrote about. And then Willie Adames gets his first homer as a Giant. He was pretty happy about that. Joke that, maybe I thought maybe I lost my power, but it's still there. So good to see him get on the board. I think he was pretty excited to join the party. Very slow start to him to his Giants career, but there was a lot going on last night. I think there were a few subtle things that I just wanted to touch on here because this game moves so quickly, and by Tuesday night, Wednesday night, it'll be gone. Like there's going to be new storylines. But a few things we saw in Monday's game that I thought were notable. Starting with Landon Roop, he's also speaking of looking over your shoulder. Like Hayden Birdsong's right there. Hayden Birdsong's pitching as well as or better than anyone on this roster right now. He did lose that battle in the spring, but they can move him back to the rotation at any time. You couldn't blame Landon Roop if he felt like have a couple bad ones and I might be back in the bullpen and Hayden's back in the rotation. I will say those guys have remained close friends. Like they're doing everything they can to help one another, which is what you want to see on a team like this. But it is one of those where he probably, after that first inning, or maybe when he goes back and thinks about that game, he thinks, man, if I get knocked out on the first inning, not only puts the team in a really tough spot, but maybe puts himself in a tough spot. When you look at 5 days down the line, 10 days down the line, things like that. But he recovers, ends up going 5 innings, gets the win. And I thought what stood out, and it was a little subtle, but well, maybe not so subtle as well because he threw 56 curveballs. But a lot of those curveballs came kind of when his back was against the wall, especially in the fourth inning. Two runners in scoring position, no outs. Throws curveballs on five of the next eight pitches, gets out of it. Then throws five straight curveballs to Bryce Harper to start the next inning, gets a strikeout. Throws a curveball to Kyle Schwarber, gets a pop up. Threw too many curveballs probably to Nick Castellanos, who hit a home run. But overall, 56 curveballs, 28 swings, 15 swinging strikes on this curveball, which is pretty incredible. 20 overall for the night. He's the first guy since Rich Hill in 2016 to throw more than 55 curveballs in a game anywhere. He's the first Giant in the pitch tracking era to throw that many, but the first guy in Major League Baseball, period. And Rich Hill had 59 in one game in 2016. But you're going back almost a decade to the last time someone was able to do that to a big league lineup. And this is a very good big league lineup he faced. And I think it just shows you kind of the quality of his stuff and the fact that even though he's a four pitch pitcher now, um, he has that elite curveball in his back pocket at all times, and he's willing to use it and really helped him last night end up salvaging what could have been an awful night for him. And just all of a sudden went, all right, here's the curveball. This is my little subtle change here. And him and Patrick Bailey were on the same page and got him through his last couple innings. So that was pretty impressive pitching from a young guy who definitely has a pitch he can throw at anybody at any time, which we learned last year. A little later in that game, I mentioned Mike Yastrzemski earlier. He comes up with a runner on third, no outs in the seventh. It's a two-run game at the time. Bob Melvin lets him face a lefty. Uh, does not do that very often, but he felt good about it. He said, "Look, I want Yastrzemski's defense out there." Thought maybe he'd put the had a good chance of putting the ball in play. He likes the swings he's taking. Doesn't happen last year. Certainly doesn't happen 2 years ago. Doesn't happen the year before that. I don't know the last time, maybe early in Yaz's Giants career, that he'd be allowed to face a lefty in that situation. I think under Gabe Kapler, it doesn't happen. I think last year, even with Bob Melvin there, he probably knows that he's going to hear from the higher ups if he doesn't pinch hit a righty there. Which I'm not saying one is right and one is wrong. Luis Matos might hit a homer there as well. He might get the run in more often than not. He probably is the better choice there, but just a little subtle thing, and thought it was interesting that we're seeing some shifts here. We're not seeing as many pinch hitters. Obviously, we're the bench is all righty. They're not playing the matchups as much as they have in the past, and that last night at least included Mike Yastrzemski, who it's been automatic for him. He knows he's coming out in that situation. And of course, he hits a two-run homer because that's what this team's doing right now. First home run off a lefty in 2 years. And Bob Melvin remembers that one. He was in the other dugout. The last one was 2023. It was a walk-off splash hit off of San Diego's Ray Kerr. And I told Bob that last night, and he went, "Oh, maybe I should pinch it for Yaz more often." But just kind of jokingly. But I think we're seeing something there where that would not have happened in the last 5 years. So it might not pay off too often, might not pay off down the line, but last night paid off, and certainly some different managing than we've seen the last few years here with the Giants. And then the last thing I wanted to touch on, because he's such a lightning rod and really potentially such an important player down the line. Camilo Doval ends up pitching the bottom of the ninth inning. It's a 10-4 game. Seems like mop-up duty. There's also a little bit of an element of like, at that point, who else are you going to get up? You've used Randy Rodriguez, you've used Eric Miller, you've used Tyler Rogers. Spencer Bivens was up multiple times. He was up early in the game. Don't want to use Birdsong again. I mean, you could use Trevino out there, but so someone had to do it, right? But it is, you're seeing a subtle change in that bullpen usage as well. And I think the change there is that Randy Rodriguez now seems to be the more trusted third right-handed reliever in the bullpen. Randy comes into a two-run game. He pitched a sixth, and that's a situation where Bob Melvin knows he has 4 innings to go, and he has four relievers. And coming into the year, Camilo would have been that fourth guy. And you save Miller for the pocket where you want to use him. You have Rogers, you have Ryan Walker, but I think we've seen Randy Rodriguez slide ahead of him, which makes sense. Slide ahead of Duvall, which makes sense because Randy's been awesome the first couple weeks and similar. I mean, throws hard, good stuff. And Camilo has had a rough week, especially the last week. End of the last homestand was rough for him. So that is a subtle shift where I think he's probably the fifth guy right now in the bullpen, where at some point coming into the year, you think like, could he be the second guy pretty quickly, given how well he was throwing in the spring? So it hasn't quite gotten where he wants to. Now, the positive for the Giants, that's a hell of a right arm if that's your fifth guy in the bullpen, your fourth right-hander in the bullpen. That's pretty impressive, and we saw it last night. I mean, gets a fly out from Bryson Stott. He faces the top of the order, strikes out Trey Turner on a slider, strikes out Bryce Harper on a 90-mile-per-hour slider down and in to end the game. So the positive, he looked good, but something subtle we saw last night. Just the role has shifted a little bit for him, which makes sense. But these things aren't always said publicly. You just kind of have to watch and see how guys are used. And to Camilo's credit, I don't think he ever pouts. He just goes out there and goes, "All right, I'm gonna strike out Bryce Harper to end the game." That's his little hop. He feels good about it. Overall, the bullpen's been outstanding. Another reason last night, it is actually, it ends up being a 10-4 game, but was pretty close at some point, and the Giants, they just keep putting up zeros, and they keep tacking on runs, which is what good teams do. And a couple breaks here and there. The JT Realmuto ball down the line. Patrick Bailey, some quality framing there in the late innings to help his relievers, and they get a good win. But yeah, I think those were some subtle things we learned last night in what ends up being looks on paper like a blowout, but wasn't really that way the whole time. Ultimately, Giants feel good about it. They win their 12th game of the year, keeping pace with the Dodgers and the Padres in what is a very, very, very good division.